Okay, welcome everyone. Thank you for joining us today. My name is Ryuichi Sato, and I'm the Global Business Advisor at Space BD. Space BD is the leading Japanese launch service provider and space commercialization company based in Tokyo. Today, we're presenting Australia-Japan Space Dialogue 2021, presented by Space BD. Just a little housekeeping before we get started. Today's webinar is being streamed through Zoom and also on YouTube. So if you have any questions during the presentation, please type them into the chat box in Zoom or YouTube respectively. We'll bring them up at the end of the presentations, and we'll also take some questions at the end of the session. So next, we'll go through the agenda and today's speakers. So session one will be the presentations from various presenters, speakers who have joined us today. And the second half, session two, we'll have a panel discussion with also a Q&A session at the end. So we have special speakers from both Australia and Japan to introduce them in today's order. So we have first Mr. Shoichiro Sakaguchi, Director of National Space Policy Secretariat of the Japanese Cabinet Office of the Japanese government. Then Mr. Carl Rodriguez, Executive Director of the Engagement and Industry Growth at Australian Space Agency. Then we have Mr. Shinobu Doi, Manager of the Japanese Experimental Module Kibo Utilization Center of the Human Spaceflight Technology Directorate at JAXA. Then Professor Eva Cairn, Professor in Space Physics and Director of QUABA. Professor Phil Bland, Director of the Space Science and Technology Center at Curtin University. Then Matt Kanazawa, Director and COO at Space BD, and Takuma Terada, General Manager of Engineering at Space BD as well. So now, without further ado, we'll turn over to Mr. Shoichiro Sakaguchi from the Cabinet Office for the opening remark. He has kindly spared his time during his busy schedule to join us today, and we highly appreciate his participation. Mr. Sakaguchi, the floor is yours.
Thank you very much. I'm Shoichiro Sakaguchi, Director of National Space Policy Secretariat at Japan, in charge of international cooperation. It is my great pleasure to be here at such an exciting event to explore future collaboration between Australia and Japan. And again, thanks to Australian Space Agency and Space BD to provide such an important occasion to make dialogues between us. And the space cooperation between Australia and Japan has been a good tradition, such as between JAXA and Australian Space Research Institution or universities. And government authorities have made a discussion for the collaboration so far. So now we are experiencing increasing important collaboration between Australian space sector and Japan since newly establishing Australian Space Agency. This October, Space BD contributed making great success to Australian University satellite put into orbit from ISS Kibo. That was a very good moment for us. As an NSPS, this important event will be fruitful and hope explore another collaboration opportunities between Australia and Japan. Thank you very much.
Ryuichi-san, mic is on.
Thank you very much, Mr. Sakaguchi, for your words and for your time. I believe he needs to leave the event. Can you stay? But either way, yeah, thanks again for making the time. ありがとうございました。
Thank you very much.
Thank you very much. ありがとうございます。
Okay, the next speakers are Mr. Shinobu Doi from JAXA and Matt Kanazawa from Space BD, who represent the Kibo utilization strategy and collaboration with the private sectors. Mr. Doi, the floor is yours.
Doi-san, mic is off.
Sorry. Thank you very much for this opportunity to join this discussion. I think the role of the National Space Agency like JAXA will be discussed as one of topics in this session. So I'd like to introduce JAXA's vision towards a future low Earth commercial utilization, and also introduce the two major program or initiatives which get involved with the private sectors of JAXA. So let me share my presentation. Okay, so first, this picture shows the JAXA's long-term vision for the low Earth orbit activities. And the vertical axis means the amount of the investment, and the horizontal axis means the time. The blue part means initiative by the government, and the white means commercial initiative to be increased in the future. At the moment, LEO activities are mainly driven by the government, and activities driven by the private sector have just started. After this, however, we intend to shift the initiative from the government to the private sectors, as we take it important to expand the LEO market by the the positive commercial activities. As the first step of the commercial utilization for the Kibo module, JAXA have chosen the 4 priority areas in Kibo utilization, which fully use our existing technology and opportunities. And we are trying to make these services standardized, frequent, periodical, and low cost for the LEO market expansion. And actually, there are 4 these areas here, and the 3 of these 4 areas, the small satellite deployment service, external platform utilization service, and also protein crystal growth experiment service. Those 3 of 4 areas, the JAXA selected Space BD as a service provider to enhance the commercial utilization. So just this is our just the big first step for the commercial utilization. Besides this approach, we'd like to introduce 2 other programs JAXA going to take. First one is the JSPAC, which means JAXA Space Innovation through Partnership and Co-Creation, launched in 2018. In this program, we will have enough conversation with private sectors and co-create new business with them based on their needs. Through the program, we aim to expand activities driven by private sectors and make the market in the future. In this program, there are several stages depending on the maturity of the co-creation of the new business, as shown here from the right bottom to the left bottom to the right top. And there are 23 ongoing projects under the JSPAC. One of the progressive business dialogue is a space media business proposed by the Basque Inc. They already demonstrated their business idea, which enables a bidirectional TV broadcast between the ground and onboard ISS via the fee-based Kibo utilization framework. And another initiative is Space Exploration Innovation Hub Center. We call it TANSAX. As for the human space flight activity towards the moon and beyond with the private sectors, when JAXA's approach is based on the understanding that the basic cutting-edge technologies exist and are evolving on the ground. So JAXA established this center in 2015, so that the JAXA act as a bridge function between the technical seas and the need to create innovation for both in the terrestrial domain and in space. The center gathers the knowledge and the specialists from various fields and create new research themes for developing technologies for the future human space exploration, as well as for these their own businesses on the Earth. We call this activity as dual utilization, which means R&D for the space and for the Earth. So we have four major areas identified here: construction and exploration, etc., to pursue, and as much as 126 companies and 65 universities and research institutes have joined in the collaborative research with JAXA. So this is from JAXA side as topic. So I'd like to hand over Kanazawa-san from the Space PD.
All right, thank you. This is Mark Kanazawa from Space PD. I am a COO and director. Today, actually, I'm joining this event from Dubai. It's just joining ISC 2021. So that's why I set up this kind of a background. And also, yesterday, still the event is going on. And yesterday, I went to Australian Pavilion and I got this very cute koala here. So and now today I'm joining with him. All right, so here I will introduce Space PD's activity related to ISS. So for the first slide, let me start with some history of our partnership with JAXA. In May 2018, Space PD was selected as the official service provider of the satellite deployment service from the ISS. And Mr. Doi kindly mentioned with our service, and as you can see on this slide, now we operate quite diversified our services under the partnership with JAXA. So for the 3.5 years, JAXA and Space PD have been deepening partnership relations for the same goal, which is to promote utilization and commercialization of the ISS. And in this context, I would like to show our biggest appreciation to Mr. Doi for his strong leadership and great support for technical transformation to Space PD. So thank you very much, as always, Doi-san. So if you go to the next slide, now I will dig deeper to each our service. So as for satellite deployment service from the ISS, Space BD have been involved in service provision of total 47 satellites so far. And among them, we completed the deployment procedure of 8 satellites. That, of course, includes Guava and Cardin University missions. Because we secure normally 3 to 4 deployment opportunities every year, very frequently, it is very easy to switch the launch period comparing to the large share launchers. And also our engineering team, like Takuma-san, who is joining today, provides project management support for those who are struggling to complete all the satellite development process in-house. And that is part of the reason why our clients choose our service, and a lot of missions are going on right now. So the next slide shows our external platform of ISS. There are stable infrastructure, in other words, a bus system on the ISS. So it means our customers do not have to be worried about any cost, workload, and the risk of making satellite as a whole. So that means users just focus on the development of mission parts and other stable infrastructure, like power and electric and mechanical infrastructure, and also uplink and downlink operation are provided by Space PD and JAXA. Currently, we got total 4 missions from 3 different countries. And the first mission was with a Spanish startup, Satlantis, who is developing an optical device for microsatellite. With this mission, we felt a lot of excitement through the process, especially before the launch. Many VIPs, including the King of Spain and astronauts in the ISS, celebrated a historical, symbolic project and collaboration between Spain and Japan. And some other users of this IC will test laser communication or docking port connection and so on. So the next slide is about XBus. So on top of IC, we put small building, as you can see here, to expose some plates on the space environment. All those plates can be brought back to the Earth after the mission. So we just started the first mission with the variety, such as corporate branding, advertisement and material test, education, and so on. And for the next slide, finally but not least, we studied the use of the microgravity environment inside of the ISS for life science missions from this year. So one example is the advanced protein crystallization service for drug design and screening. This is also under the exclusive partnership with JAXA. Now we are accumulating know-how of this kind of life science technology in space. The mechanism is that when we crystallize the protein in microgravity environment, we create very high resolution crystals so that we can analyze the structure of protein or any molecular it may be to find a better solution for drug discovery and some other uses. It's kind of a beauty of microgravity environment in space. And so far, we got 4 customers in total from Brazil, Taiwan, with our local partners in Japan, and we also so much look forward to make joint project with Australia in this field soon as well. As a final note, if you go to the final slide, so yeah, as I introduced, we accumulated many missions in various fields with the partnership with JAXA for this 3 years and a half. And our customers are from total 15 different countries and diversified background. And while I see a lot of potentials in Australia and Japan collaboration in space, the ISS, Kibo Japan module, can be a great platform for fostering. It can be a safe, proven, and easy test bed for accumulating space technology even towards deep space exploration era. And also it is important to stimulate a variety of use of space, because even how much we develop launchers and satellites technology, which is also very important, but we need to involve more non-space industry to maximize the value of them and as a great tool to enhance human life, both on Earth and forthcoming Moon to Mars era. And of course, ISS is a symbol of international cooperation promoting peaceful use of space. And in this context, the tie-up between Australia and Japan are very, very important. So that is all from me. And I look forward to the panel to discuss more in details and wide range of topics. Thank you very much.
Okay, thank you very much, Mr. Doi and Mac. We'll take some time to take some questions at the end of session 1. Just as a reminder, please be sure to type your questions into the chat box. Next, we'll turn over to Mr. Carl Rodriguez from the Australian Space Agency. He will introduce us about the latest developments and initiatives in the Australian space industry.
Thank you, Sato-san. Really pleasure to be here, and Doi-san, good to see you again. And I'm looking forward to the discussion at the end of today. And Mac-san, obviously, thank you for visiting the Australian Pavilion, and I hope that we get more koalas as well too. I will just share my slides at the moment. It would be my pleasure to take you through a very brief overview of the Australian Space Agency and developments so far, as well as then talking a little bit about some of the potential collaboration areas that we will see. And then, of course, my colleagues from Coava and Curtin University will talk more about their activities as well. So for those of you who may not know, the Australian Space Agency was established only 3.5 years ago, but specifically to encourage collaboration and the growth of industry in space. And so there are a number of things, obviously, that we have been working on for decades as Australia and supporting the global space initiatives from many, many countries. But with the industrialization of space, with the collaboration that's opening up, with the platforms that would be required moving forward, then I think this is a fantastic opportunity for deeper collaboration between Japan and Australia in these areas. Our goal, of course, is to triple the size of the Australian space economy and grow 20,000 new jobs by 2030. Our space strategy itself is based on 4 main pillars. One is that we are absolutely aware that we cannot do all of this by ourselves, and that international collaboration is an inherent characteristic of any global space strategy. We're also building up the national capability so that industry itself will be able to participate from a national scale and utilize not only the national capability, but improve themselves and essentially look at how we can participate more globally. We're also the regulator, which means that it's a great opportunity for safety and entrepreneurship to blend together as we grow our space industry. And of course, anything to do with space is just inherently inspiring to the next generation. And we see that coming through very strongly in the support that we have from the Australian public. Given that we're just such a young agency, we have phased our strategy into three main timelines. Phase one was to set up the conditions for the agency and for the sector here in Australia. Phase two was to engage with the opportunity and ensure that we had a number of the doors being opened with international space agencies and international organisations that would then be able to collaborate with local Australian organisations, be they research institutions or private industry. And then now we're in phase three and gearing up for the success of the strategy moving forward. And there's many things that we can talk about as part of additional collaboration. We've identified 7 key areas in our space future. And these are areas that we believe that Australia has significant capability or unique characteristics that engender collaboration on an international scale. And each of these areas we are building through a roadmap, a technology roadmap for the future. And that's based on what we have as key areas that we can bring to the table, where we identify collaboration opportunities, where we identify market opportunities, and then what we can do as a nation to pursue each of these areas. One such technology roadmap was released in December of last year, and that outlines our communications technologies and services. And as I mentioned, for each of those priority areas, we will be publishing roadmaps that will appear over the coming weeks and months into next year. And again, I stress that each of these areas will be looking for collaboration opportunities and identifying what we will be targeting between now and 2030. So there are a number of good opportunities there that I think that Australian industry and research institutions can have with our Japanese colleagues. The additional elements that Australia is building here in country and offering these through commercial industry for the Australian space sector to grow, to mature, to essentially de-risk all of their elements here in country are items that we're building across the nation. Our space data analysis facility is built right next to one of Australia's 2 largest supercomputers, and that's intended to open up significant opportunities for data analytics from a number of different service providers. Our robotics automation and AI command and control center, again being built in WA, is essentially looking to facilitate the translation of technologies that come from our resources and mining sector, and then translate that into space with our partners to address markets such as in-orbit servicing or exploration, extraterrestrial exploration. And then our first mission control center, which is a common user facility, has already been launched in Adelaide. And there are a significant number of other opportunities that we're building and developing. We have a significant program that is in train at the moment. And this is our Moon to Mars initiative. And this is split across 3 different areas, again, which I would stress has opportunities for significant international collaboration. Our supply chain program is facilitating Australian organisations to enter into commercial supply chains. And as we talk about international collaboration, of course, anything to do with building products and service and advancing and evolving service offerings need supply chain capability and solutions. Our demonstrator program aligns very closely with a number of the services that the ISS utilization program has been outlined by Doi-san and Mac-san just recently. And our Trailblazer program is our ambitious program for Australia to essentially go to the moon. And that was announced last week, where we have we'll be working in collaboration with NASA to take a Foundation Services rover to the lunar surface. And that's going to be focusing on operations and maintenance and sustainability as part of the services that we'll be looking to explore. But again, as part of any and all of the activities that we're facing here in the coming years, there is a significant opportunity for international collaboration beyond even with just with NASA, as we all seek to participate and to support the humanity's goals of going back to the moon and onto Mars. Within Australia as well too, since and for interest for some of our Japanese industry colleagues, the Australian government is fostering further collaboration and encouraging manufacturing strategies to be developed and to be deployed here in Australia. Space is one of the 6 key identified priority areas within the manufacturing roadmap, and this is significant capability and opportunity and funding to establish deeper and greater collaboration, particularly through elements such as satellite manufacture, component manufacture, or other supply chain capabilities that build capability between nations. I mentioned that we are international is one of the key elements. International and national capability is one of the key elements of the strategy, and this indicates some of the capabilities and collaboration that we will be pursuing. And of course, we value quite strongly our partnership with JAXA in this particular case, and also all of the companies that we're working with to build capability here in Australia and execute opportunities on an international scale. Some of the elements as well too that I wanted to talk about in terms of our collaboration with Japan in general and more broadly, which build on the foundation of these initial areas of collaboration and open up further opportunities. We are looking at the ISS utilization, KIBO, the Asian Beneficial Challenge component that is part of the ISS utilization of KIBO. And of course, we're working here in collaboration with JAXA and with a local company called One Giant Leap to execute on some of these programs. And this is a picture of the Australian wattle seeds on the ISS. And thank you to Jackie and Bob, who are facilitating a lot of this activity through One Giant Leap and with JAXA to bring benefit to almost 300 schools around Australia as part of this educational component. This is also elements of the KIBO ABC Challenge, and this is the Robot Programming Challenge as well too, that we're also supporting and fostering and encouraging a number of Australian schools to participate in. And these are just basic elements that we will continue to build on as we also hosted Doisan here in Australia recently at our headquarters to talk about more of the capabilities of ISS utilization and all of those services that Doisan mentioned prior. Of course, last year in December, we were very, very honoured to participate and support JAXA's phenomenal exercise and project in the return of the Hayabusa 2 and the asteroid sample return mission. This was actually taken in Woomera at the time when the sample was retrieved from the landing site or from the site itself and was being brought to the central investigation facility. And of course, collaboration such as this is obviously fantastic in terms of a program and a mission capability and opens further doors. And we are looking towards building on these elements to work closer with JAXA for future missions as well. And looking forward to that collaboration on a research basis as well as continued commercial basis. But of course, collaboration has a human face. And as part of the celebrations, again, the Japanese teams and the Australian teams were just celebrating the success of a fantastic science collaboration mission. We're also members of APRSAF, and we continue to work with JAXA and our partners in region, again, to explore significant opportunities for collaboration between countries and between agencies. And we're looking forward to APRSAF, this time virtually in the coming year, but hopefully face-to-face in future years. And there's also a number of capabilities and working groups that we're very much active in as part of APRSAF. And finally, JAXA and the Australian Space Agency were part of what we call the Artemis 8, or part of what was called the Artemis 8. Artemis is now being supported by many new agencies and countries since the establishment of this in October last year. But it was a proud moment for all of us as we share the ambition for a peaceful exploration of deep space and following all of the collaboration opportunities that will result as a matter of that collaboration. And so as part of that, I will end here in terms of an exciting future awaits. There is a significant amount of opportunity that both Japan and Australia share, and ambition that both Japan and Australia share in terms of collaboration commercially, in terms of science and research, and in terms of the broader and longer term markets of collaboration in long-term space exploration. And all of those, as we heard from Mac, need stepping stones in order to get there. Qualification, validation, proof points, utilization, commercial business models as well. And so I think we are absolutely excited at the opportunities ahead. Thank you so much. I will stop there.
Thank you very much, Mr. Rodriguez. Yeah, that was really interesting presentation, very relevant for today's audience. And yes, certainly very much exciting times ahead for both countries. Next, we move on to a presentation from the satellite developers. First, we'll have Professor Eva Cairns from the University of Sydney and Director of Quava, and Professor Phil Bland from Curtin University. Earlier this month, both have successfully deployed their Cubesat from the ISS Kibo. So please tell us more about your missions and aspirations for the future.
So let me just get to the next bit. Right, so thank you very much for this opportunity. It is a thrill to be able to talk at this Australia-Japan Space Dialogue. So as I was introduced, I'm Eva Cairns, and I'm part of the Quava team, which is for the Australian Research Council Training Centre for CubeSats, UAVs and their applications. And you see our first satellite in front of you, Quava 1, and I'm looking forward to telling you a little bit about Quava 1 and our vision for the future, which does, we hope, involve collaboration with Japan. So what is Quava? It's an Australian Research Council centre funded to train people, primarily to become part of Australia's space agency, secondarily to resolve certain research problems, and thirdly to try and move towards commercialisation of those problems. And we have a number of partners. It's a group of 11, including 3 universities, University of Sydney, University of New South Wales and Macquarie University, 4 private companies, including Sabre Astronautics, Arbor Carbon and Hayabusa, and then 3 government labs, 2 at the Defence Science and Technology Group and 1 at the Bureau of Meteorology. So what are we about? Well, what's the big picture? Quava 1 is our first satellite. So it's a test satellite in many ways, designed, built and tested in Australia. It should, when it comes alive, hopefully soon, be using Sabre's Responsive Space Operations Centre down in Canberra, and we look forward to that. We carry 4 unique Australian payloads developed at our universities and 2 separate technology demonstrators. As well as that, we've engaged quite a bit with the International Amateur Radio Union, in part related to detecting and receiving the satellite beacons, as well as trying to train people in that. And we were very happy to be launched on the 29th of August on SpaceX Bird up to the ISS, and then deployed on the 6th of October. So we very much thank Space BD, including especially perhaps Takuma-san for his work there, and JAXA as well for helping us get into space. Of course, we also need to thank the Australian Space Agency and a whole host of others, but I won't go through them in detail. Now, Quava 1, I'll tell you a little bit more about in a moment, but it's intended to be a stepping stone to bigger and better spacecraft. So a little bit more about Quava 1. You'll see our payloads on our technology demonstrators color-coded here. It's a standard 3-unit CubeSat. with many of the components allegedly commercial off the shelf from overseas. I won't go through the details, but then we have a number of solar panels that are Australian made, and then a data over power network on the spacecraft, which we think is one of the first to fly in space. And then 4 payloads, a radiation counter, a reconfigurable electronics experiment, which is RUSH, and then a multiple sub-instrument optical assembly called the imaging spectrograph and Tolaboy instrument, which I'll show in a moment, and then a GPS receiver. Lots of software associated with that, and we've been involved in helping Sabre Astronautics, in part as a guinea pig, to develop software for the Responsive Space Operations Centre in Adelaide. So just a tiny bit more about our payloads. ISTI, for instance, uses one aperture, where the light comes in, goes through a beam splitter and goes to 2 separate detectors. One's a rather good camera, and the other one is a spectrograph. And then the other part is Tiny Toll, rather than Tolaboy, which is intended to look at the diffraction patterns for double stars and be able to then take out the excess light and be able to look for exoplanets. The other's a GPS receiver, of course, is in some sense standard. We're going to go beyond that towards reflectometry. We don't just use the direct feed from a satellite, but instead look at signals reflected off the sea as well, or the land, where we can get information about the wave state, for instance, and the wind. Let's move on slightly towards our future plans. So Kuava 2, it's intended to be a 6U spacecraft, basically taking what was our plans for 2 separate 3U satellites, combining them together. And we hope to launch that on the H3 as a rideshare with Space BD, but we have to work on getting the contract and everything together for that. But if, as we hope, if that goes ahead, we'll have a GPS reflectometry instrument, a state-of-the-art Australian hyperspectral imager, a little star tracker, a plasma thruster. So it's going to be quite a bit more exotic, but this one will have no flammable fuels. A little plasma wave receiver to look at space weather, in particular looking at the electron density and temperature throughout the ionosphere, and then a radiation counter. Another one that we're focused on a lot is another 6U. It's Waratah Seed, which is a rideshare satellite where we basically want to get or attract payloads from commercial clients across New South Wales, Australia, and ideally elsewhere, perhaps Japan, and with a payload competition as well for some New South Wales-led companies, looking at December 2022. Beyond that, space situational awareness and space debris is a major interest for us, really with the space weather part of that under our particular focus. And we put together an expression of interest proposal for a Centre of Excellence on space weather prediction, which does involve a large Cubesat constellation. Again, something that we might envisage collaborating with Japanese colleagues on. And then our next generation of Kuava. All research centres have a finite lifetime, at least in terms of the funding that they're given. And ours looks like it probably will end in 2023 unless we go ahead and renew. So this is our first voyage. We look forward to success. And thank you very much again, Space BD and JAXA, and for that matter, NASA and SpaceX in getting us into space safely. We were thrilled to look at the deployment. Thank you.
Thank you very much for the presentation, Professor Cairns. Now, I think we have the video of the moment of the deployment of Kuava 1.
Okay, Ryuji, we are ready. Let's play. So here is mission control room in Tsukuba Space Center. And so
All right. Down
Yeah.
under
Now,
Sydney, Australia.
Flight
This is
Director
Jack Supply
asked
Director calling
final
from
call,
Japan. We'd like to
for
ask your
deployment
final go
to Kawabata.
for satellite deployment from Launcher 2. The representative of Kuaba 1 from Australia. Are you ready?
This is Kuaba 1. We are ready. On behalf of the team, go.
Okay, copy that. Thank you very much. We'll be deploying your satellite in about 8 minutes. Stand by.
Fantastic.
Yeah, so one of the great aspects of JSOT opportunity is to be able to watch the moment of deployment like this. So it's a very beautiful image. So Professor Kent, how did you feel watching this moment?
Well, obviously a little nervous, but mostly quietly confident. I mean, as you know, deployment rates or success rates are close to 100%. So really, we weren't worried about that. What we were worried about is coming alive in space. So, and it was very exciting to be asked to do the go, no go command, or or at least request. So that's something I think is, thrilling and something to keep.
Okay, thank you. So I know that you had a lot of difficulties, especially this time as the satellite development was done under pandemic. So I'd like to express my respect for your efforts. Thank you very much. And finally, so please tell us about your enthusiasm for the next mission.
Look, we're very excited about the next one. Yes, we're a little bit depressed perhaps at the moment, or worried about whether we will come alive in space. But we know that space is hard, and that there will be times when things just don't work out, and you need to address that, work through the issues, and then try and build better. And to keep your enthusiasm and your drive to go forward. And so we're very excited about it. We've got, the Kuaba 2 project that I mentioned there. We've got Waratah Seed. So we have a number of things in the fire which are, going to go fairly soon. We're looking at the end of next year. And so really it's a time for some reflection and some excitement and then a lot of hard work to get there.
Thank you. So we are looking forward to collaborating with you on the next mission. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Arigato.
Arigato. So Ryuichi,
Right. Yeah.
I'll get back to you.
All right, then. Well, yeah, thank you very much, Takuma and Professor Cairns. Next presentation is from Professor Bland from Curtin University and Bina 1 mission. Professor Bland, you have your presentation.
Thank you. Sorry. So I'm going to tell you a little bit about our program and Binar 1 and our Binar space program as well, and the technical development of that. I've actually introduced an additional technical complication in my presentation, which is that I'm doing this outside in a very windy place. So if that becomes an issue, then please let me know. I'd like to begin by saying a very big thank you to Space BD for all the help that you've given us throughout the program. It's been tremendous, and a huge thank you to JAXA as well for the interaction that we had with the deployment. That was a huge thrill for our students, and that was just tremendous. So I'm going to play a video at the beginning.
Our space program is named for the Noongar word for Bible, which ties back to our heritage in the Desert Bible Network. So this spacecraft here, we combined it all into one smaller payload, which we're going to use to integrate some of our payloads for our PhD and also for future space missions.
And by designing that all, we have the opportunity to produce as many as we want to, which means we can explore a lot of opportunities for missions for Western Australia to inspire science and research and also take on technology challenges in space.
There's a video with our program manager Ben Hartig, who's pulled together this tremendous team that has built our first spacecraft. The innovation that we try to pursue with this is to put all of the spacecraft systems in a Cubesat on a single printed circuit board. So the principal driver for BinR1 was as a technical demonstrator to show that that worked. It was to see, okay, is that first step, is that innovation successful? We had a small camera on it as well. And we've worked with Carl, introduced the team that's building the remote operations center in Perth. We're also working with them so that they can communicate with the spacecraft and develop some of their operational protocols that way. We had a very scary first 2 weeks where we couldn't hear it, and we were fortunate enough to hear a beacon after 2 weeks, and we're now trying to establish full communications with the spacecraft. The good thing is that we know now that that bus is operational. So the main technical demonstration has been successful, and we're very much hoping that our colleagues at University of Sydney, Eva and his team, also were able to get in touch with theirs. So as I say, our program, the BinR space program, the initial step is to do a systems check of that integrated payload. We're excited about the possibility of that because by putting it all on a single board, it means we can leverage consumer electronics manufacturing to more easily build small spacecraft, and which means that we can help students and university colleagues fly their payloads more easily. So this is a little model of, this was BinR1 before it flew. I was fortunate enough to, the team gave me the honor of tightening the last bolt in the spacecraft, which was very exciting for me. It's a big deal for us to engage with the state of Western Australia and try and get interest from our state. This is the Premier of WA, looking at one of the models of the spacecraft that we had, and he was very, very supportive, and that was really exciting to have his support. He was actually really excited, so that's a nice picture of him getting particularly excited. It's always been a big part of our program to bring in as many students as possible. We've had 40 students working on the project right now. Can work with us, and they can get inspired for careers in space. The last part of this is that part of the inspiration here is that we've got a program with a destination, and what we want to do is send 2 small spacecraft to the moon. So where we're hoping to get to in 3 or 4 years' time is a mission to the moon to do a geophysical survey. And that's with working with NASA, JPL on the payload, ESA on mission control. So that's part of our program to further science and the goals of the Space Agency and inspire students as part of that. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Professor Bland. Now, I think we have also a video as well. Moment of deployment.
Okay. So now we are ready. So let's start.
Hello for the host lady here. This is Jackson Flight Director. We'd like to ask your final goal for satellite deployment from Launcher 1. The representative of Bina 1 from Australia, are you ready?
It's Bina 1 and we are ready. Let's go!
Maybe, thank you. So now you made it. Yeah. So it looks actually really beautiful. So yeah, so it's a wonderful moment. So Professor Bland, so at the moment of deployment, Bina team was very excited, as you can see here. So what were your impressions at this moment?
Our team were incredibly excited, and I was absolutely thrilled. It was I think it was so amazing that we could get that live feed and actually see it in real time and be able to shout, go, and then see it be deployed and see our spacecraft against the clouds of the Earth. I mean, to be part of a team that builds something and then actually you see that fly in space, that inspired me. I've been working on this for a while now, so that was a wonderful moment.
Okay, thank you very much. So it's a very impressive moment. So, on the other hand, so please let us know if there were any difficulties in the satellite development under the pandemic, and how did you overcome the difficulties?
For us, it was we made a choice right at the beginning to kind of go our own path in terms of developing the bus. It's become like it feels like a logical choice now, and it's opened up a number of possibilities for us. But it was quite scary in the middle there because it's a longer timeline. So I think I'm pleased that we did it, but it was quite scary in the middle there because it was longer development because of that.
Yeah, but finally you made it. So congratulations. And so lastly, so please tell us your enthusiasm for the next mission.
Yeah, so the next mission we have another one with Space BD which I think is scheduled for August, and that'll be 3 spacecraft at once. And that is going to be, they'll be testing out different types of radiation shielding with radiation sensors embedded. There'll be entry, ascent, landing experiment and upgraded comm system. So, and deployable solar panels as well. So we're kind of increasing our capability and systems as we go. So it'll be really exciting.
Yeah, so also, let's work together again for next mission. We are looking forward to it. So thank you very much. Yeah,
thank you.
Thank you. Okay, so Luigi, I'll back to you.
Yeah, thank you very much, Professor Cairns and Professor Bland. So that marks the end of session 1, the presentations, where we'll have closing a message from Mr. Doi from JAXA.
Okay. So thank you very much for all presenters. Very informative and impressive presentation. And I understand that Australian Space Agency and the JAXA are going to encourage private sectors, researchers, and universities, of course, to develop a necessary technology for low Earth orbit, and also, moreover, the human spaceflight exploration towards the moon and beyond. And I think the BINA project and also Kuaba project are the one of the good example for the Australia and the Japan collaboration, because the Australian, the private sectors, universities and researchers, institutions can access or utilize the keyboard module via the Japanese private sector like Space BD. And also, Australian Space Agency and JAXA reached an agreement on a memorandum of the collaboration in 2020 for not only for the space microgravity utilization, but also other space-related areas. The many, all of the space areas covered under this memorandum of collaboration. So I hope this MOC helps to accelerate the collaboration between the Australian and the Japan. So with this comment, and I'd like to conclude the first session, and thank you, Ben. Thank you very much for your attention. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Mr. Doi, for the closing message and remarks. Now, so that marks the end of session 1. Now we would like to start session 2, which is the panel discussion. The topic for the panel is how can we promote and cultivate the space industry in Australia and Japan. We will ask each presenter from the first session on their thoughts and vision for the topic. And at the end of the panel discussion, we'll take some questions from the Zoom webinar audience. So please type your questions in the chat box. So we'll start with the first question, looking at the ways to promote or cultivate the space industry. So in your opinion, what are some of the key challenges or obstacles faced by the space industry or space community in general? Or alternatively, what are some of the new opportunities that have risen in the recent time? So to start the session, do you have any thoughts from the Japanese side? How about Mr. Doi or Mac?
Max-san, do you start first?
Okay. So yeah, let me start from my side for this topic. So one of the challenges, but as well as potentials or opportunities, is that most of people still feel space as a very far and difficult area for human life and commercial activities. So in that context, the fact that 2 Australian universities could make and operate their own satellites has very strong message to cultivate the image that the space is not that far, and it is important to enhance the recognition that many space-related technologies are used for our daily life, and the hurdle of access to space is getting lower and lower in accordance with commercialization and technological innovation. And in that context, one good sign is that we are getting more and more encouraged for this 1 to 2 years from what we call non-space companies or schools or even local government, how they can use space as a leverage. The purpose are very diverse, from education, advertisement, or revitalization of local economy, and so on. And what Space BD is doing and trying is to support materializing such projects from the aspect of business development and also intermediary between global players and local players in Japan, and also engineering consultation. So that's kind of both challenges and opportunities.
And from the Australian side, Mr. Rodriguez, do you have any thoughts on this topic?
Sure, I think Max actually covered it in a very interesting way. I was actually thinking through this. Obviously, there's a number of challenges in addressing space. Space is hard, space is difficult, but the commercialization of it, as we've seen from some of the partners here on the call, it's available and it's there to be used, and the commercial elements there just need to be identified. I think awareness is an interesting comment, and I would say it it's a generic sort of word, but I would say that as more people understand that space is accessible for universities, for other services, for other commercial deployment, that then becomes itself the ability to build on it and to generate more and more awareness. Events such as this is a celebration, right, of the activities that Japan and Australian organisations have achieved recently, and this is going to reach a number of other people in the ecosystem. And I think understanding, what is available is just the start of a longer conversation. In this case, it was satellite launch services. In other cases, it will lead to some of the other utilization services that have been identified. So I think awareness is one, and so I think as we work through that, understanding that not just the way that these great universities have actually launched their own capability, but then in the future, as we start to see other technologies and other services and other customers actually launching from LEO or utilizing LEO in other ways, the components that contribute from either Japanese companies or Australian companies then goes to what Mac was saying, and that's the opportunity that there is a broader capability that we can bring in from all over Australia, manufacturing, sealants, films, coatings, robotics, AI, etc. All of those components, as we identify those joint solutions, that celebration just builds on itself, and then we'll essentially overcome that challenge of seeing space as too hard.
Yeah, good points. Yeah, thank you. And to Professor Phil Bland and Professor Cairns, do you have any thoughts, any key obstacles or key challenges that you sort of identified over the time of the projects there?
I think I'd like to talk more about the opportunities. Actually, I think in terms of closer relationships and collaborations, the developing collaborations between our two countries in science and research is such a great way of developing those closer links in multinational missions. We were really fortunate to be working with JAXA on the Hayabusa 2 re-entry and doing, our team was out in Woomera making observations from using our desert fireball network. As part of that, was a great thrill for everyone involved. We're involved also in the analysis of the sample return materials, and it's tremendous to be part of that. And that's a great environment for both our researchers and our students. And if we're helping, working with Japanese colleagues on that, then that's tremendous as well. So I think it's just a really easy way of building those relationships, working together on joint challenging projects. More of that, I think, is a great way of building that community between our nations.
I guess I would say that the points made so far are very good. There are many opportunities, there's increasing awareness, and I think that there are difficulties, at least in Australia. I think that Japan supports its space industry extremely well, and I think that's actually true for Australia increasingly. That's the focus of the Australian Space Agency and indeed of the government to fund space industry. And I think that those schemes are there, and that's good. Even if one can quibble and say that the per capita funding is about 1% of that in the United States. It's a start, and we're moving towards successes there. I think one issue, though, is that in general, it's not the space sector overall that's being supported. It's really space industry rather than space academia, you might call it. And I think that's one element that is well supported in Japan. I think that, and indeed in most of the relevant countries, you know, the United States, Europe, etc. Generally, they devote something like a half of their budget towards science or public good type missions, and roughly 50% to industry support. And you know, that may not be the Australian way, and maybe that's right, but I think that something closer to that, where we look at the space sector as a whole and recognize that, you know, we're celebrating here in part university programs, you know, with Phil's one from Curtin, with the Kawaba one. Those are basically university programs. They're not industry programs per se. And yet we're being celebrated, of course, as being successes, which, you know, should be to some extent. So I'm looking forward to perhaps a broader embrace of the space sector in Australia. And I think there are many opportunities for our two countries and for Australia as a whole to engage with the world on that. And I look forward to us all being part of that.
Yeah, thank you very much. And yeah, for those great points. And in order to sort of address those, to meet those opportunities and address those issues or challenges that all the panelists has mentioned, what initiatives or measures that are currently running or planning to do in the near future to resolve these matters? Probably the best, maybe we'll start with Mr. Doi. What initiatives are put in place?
Yes, thank you very much. As actually, I feel the same difficulties as Mark-san mentioned and Carl-san mentioned. Actually, the Kibo module is a very huge science laboratory in space to provide various capabilities, opportunities inside and outside to demonstrate your idea. But even in Japan, many of the people do not aware of this capability or opportunities. So that is the big challenge for JAXA in Japan. And in order to facilitate the commercial utilization, for example, of the Kibo module, JAXA are going to allocate a certain amount of resources, such as launch mass and crew time for the commercial usage and propagate these opportunities in public. And also another important aspect is the JAXA is going to increase the mission integrators to bridge the end users who may not be familiar with space to the actual mission demonstration. This is the Space BD are playing this part, I think. So Space BD bridge the end user in Australia to the space. So actually, the JAXA is now thinking that this kind of the mission integrator to be increased. So that is the one of the JAXA are taking approach.
Thank you very much. And perhaps moving to the Australian side also, what initiatives or measures are currently being considered?
So I might just reiterate, take the point to reiterate some of the programs that I mentioned in the presentation. Again, the Space Agency is fairly new, fairly young, and we're developing those measures as we go through. We have the Space Infrastructure Fund, which is developing and building capability here in Australia. An initial program that we launched was our International Space Investment Initiative, and that was open to industry and researchers alike to essentially support international collaboration. And it was a limited fund at that time, but it was well and truly supported by the Australian public. And of course, all that information is items that we are taking on board as we design future programs for the agency. And the active ones at the moment, and I think these are well aligned with some of the opportunities in front of us. Supply chain, I mentioned, is open for Australian organisations to get into those supply chains, international supply chains. So there are a number of Japanese companies that would be developing technology and capability that they may like flown on the ISS or elsewhere. As the capabilities of Australia and Japanese companies and research institutions for that matter are well known, then potentially there could be additional collaboration that's de-risked by investments such as this. Our demonstrator is clearly aligned at generating space heritage for Australian organisations, and that's something that we have had 20 feasibility studies for demonstrative missions to take technology and opportunity into space already announced, and we hope to announce the next phase of the program, which will see several opportunities for Australian consortia to fly technology into space and to look for services that are being provided by companies such as Space BD. And then our Trailblazer as well too is a broad program of international collaboration. While these are programs that exist now, as I mentioned, we're looking at how we engage with industry and research and academia, and looking at how we can develop these programs into the future as we continue to grow and mature as the space agency ourselves.
Fantastic. I don't know, do other panelists have some points to add on some of the measures or initiatives that are being considered?
I'll maybe add that I think in terms of science team membership on missions, it's very easy to facilitate that with small travel budgets. So it's kind of it's a very easy step that can make an awful lot of difference for individual researchers, but it can pay real dividends in terms of facilitating those very close links that you can build between countries when colleagues, our science colleagues, can work together on a mission, and reciprocal agreements around payloads on missions as well can be a huge boost. So that would be my contribution.
Nice. And just one example for commercial effort from my side. Just let me introduce one project in Japan now for the education project. Now we are making kind of a satellite development, launch, and operation program for all high school students. This is a collaboration with the Clark Memorial International High School in Japan, and also when it comes to the satellite development and also the engineering education, we collaborate with the University of Tokyo and some of startup in Japan. So this is for the high school to enhance again awareness and the recognition that the space is not that far in this area, and this is not only educating the the engineering and how to develop the satellite, but also we train high school students for their communication skills, project management, or even like business capabilities through this process. So that I think that kind of capabilities are very important, not only if they go to space industry, but any other industry or any human life, and also when it comes to human space exploration, as Carl-san mentioned. And this kind of capability to collaborate each other, even in the international environment, are very, very important. So I think Professor Brand are making this same kind of education initiative in Western Australia. So maybe we can make a collaboration, like exchange students for a few weeks to understand each other, that kind of thing. So just as an introduction.
Thank you very much.
A lot of interesting ideas there, and I guess I'd just like to add one and just make a point about one initiative that we're working on. That's this Center of Excellence proposal, and part of that involves a Cubesat constellation looking at the ionosphere, which of course is vastly important from the point of view of radio communication, GPS issues, all of these types of things depend upon the ionosphere. and yet it's rather poorly understood. Certainly the details of how turbulence develops, where it develops, the time-varying ionosphere, whether most of the so-called traveling ionospheric disturbances move from the equator to the polar regions, or do they go the other way, or is it 50-50? A lot of details that aren't understood, and yet the ionosphere is only, 100 kilometers to 500 kilometers or so above our heads. And I think this is an area that Japan has a long history of. Australia actually has a long history of ionospheric research, and until about 20 years ago. And this is an area that I think might be fruitful for us to work on. So that would be an unfunded at the moment Cubesat project, but it does link into other initiatives like the Cubesat Constellation that Dan Baker and others are working on, which is a little bit like QB50, which many of you will know of. So I think a lot of opportunities out there now, which are exciting, and look forward to hearing more about and working on together.
Yeah, I think that really brings us on to the final question, which is about the methods or approach to promote greater collaboration between Australia and Japan. And Professor Cairns, you mentioned about these kind of centre of excellency and activities, partnership research and development project in academia. I don't know, perhaps would you be able to elaborate how we can foster greater collaboration?
Well, I mean, yes, I'd be happy to. One idea would be an Australia-Japan or Japan-Australia, if you want it. Collaboration specifically on space research and space industry. We actually already have dedicated Australia-India, Australia-China, Australia-France, etc. Collaborations. Why not one that's with Japan and involves space? You could imagine, well, the budget doesn't have to be huge, obviously, but you can imagine a number of angles or different foci that could be developed, whether that's shared CubeSat projects, whether it's educational projects and student CubeSats, a multitude of different things we could work on. And I think that's one way, and it would be, what's the right term? There are lots of examples of that on the Australian side, and I suspect there are examples of that on the Japanese side. And maybe it just requires a little bit of discussion between our governments or our space agencies to get that special connection.
Right, yeah, no, great ideas. Okay, well, I think we might start to turn to the question from the audience. We received several questions, great questions, by the way. So we'll start with the first one. One moment. From Ms. Yukari Ishiwata. So two questions to Carl. What in particular do you expect Japanese companies to invest into? You mentioned advanced manufacturing, but some detail will be great. Also, what sort of support from Australian government could be available to foster for Japanese companies to promote collaboration between Australia and Japan in the space industry?
Thank you, Ishiwata-san. I think that there's a number of things to say here. I think they're very good questions. What areas would we expect Japanese companies to invest into, I think is a broad question. As I mentioned, there's a number of areas that we think that we have capability in, but we'd obviously love to work with partners internationally to understand where our capabilities actually complement commercial solutions. Because at the end of the day, we would love to see companies and organizations in Australia participating in those commercial, sustainable sorts of operations and modes as well too. And as part of that, in any of those 7 priority areas, we'd be keen to explore opportunities that Japanese companies would be strong in and have unique capabilities in, that we could then share some of that awareness with Australian organisations. advanced manufacturing is exactly that. It is very broad, but again, it can be anything from new materials, it can be 3D printing, it can be new capabilities. We're seeing companies that were previously in just materials development now supporting the space industry, and we're seeing companies essentially building, using next generation sorts of components and carbon fiber elements to build some of the Cubesat development here in Australia. So any of those activities that, again, Japanese companies have capability in would be interesting to see if there's opportunities for collaboration here in Australia. I mentioned some of the larger programs to attract space manufacturing and manufacturing more broadly here into Australia, and some of those are fairly significant programs that run into the billion-dollar mark, and there are probably the better channels to work through there is with our colleagues in Austrade, who have the remit for understanding and promoting industry collaboration across both Australia and Japan. Austrade is obviously global, but they have a number of folk and resources in Japan that are trying to promote a greater collaboration. And there's identified opportunities, identified capabilities, identified programs that Japanese and Australian companies can tap into that Austrade will be able to supply and to support. And of course, as part of that, Eva mentioned even more broadly, the government-to-government types of arrangements that Japan and Australia could be working on. We started that with the MOU, or the MOC rather, to get into effect between JAXA and between Australia. So that's point one. But point two, Australia and Japan share quite significant science and technology activities and science and technology initiatives. And so some of those, I believe that we'd be able to introduce or get tapped into some of those arrangements that our Department of Foreign Affairs and Trade would be supporting. We'd get further information from Austrade. I know that the Australia-Japan Business Council as well too supports significant capabilities and collaboration here between the two nations. So I think in terms of programs that can be accessed, there's a wide variety building on just the history of Japan and Australia collaboration and relations very broadly. And I think in terms of advanced manufacturing, I think that's something that, again, is broad, but we also understand that Japan has significant capability in satellite manufacturing and small satellite manufacturing. So there could be an opportunity for the development of additional capability here in country, in Australia, from Japanese collaborators, maybe supply chain opportunities for components that would feed into Japanese satellite builds. We understand, or we're even looking at opportunities in the medium to long term beyond advanced manufacturing, but other opportunities for collaboration, such as potentially in launch or communication services or any of those elements. I think are just open to working with a number of the government organisations here.
Okay, no, thank you very much, Mr. Rodriguez. Clearly, there's various avenues to approach. Another question from the audience, from Mr. Yasutake. Satellites are used for a variety of purposes. What are some of the use cases that are unique to Australia, and what are some of the uses that Australia needs? You mentioned about Australia's vast landmass. Maybe Professor Cairns and Professor Bland, if you have any thoughts on unique use cases of the satellite in Australia.
Do you want to go first, Phil? Or do you want me to?
Yeah. Is my microphone working? Yes.
Yes.
I think one area that I think is it's not necessarily unique to Australia, but I think is monitoring bushfires and early warning on bushfires and being able to guide our emergency workers quickly to areas where there's susceptibility there. That's a big deal for us. So that's an area that I know the Space Agency has been working in, a number of other federal entities have been working on here. So that's quite a big one for Australia.
So that one combines nicely communications and also imaging. And those are, in some sense, they're the typical use cases for satellites. But I think they're really important for Australia. Not just the bushfires, of course, like Phil said, but also water, for instance, and crops, things like that. There's also, and then the communications aspects with the Internet of Things, with the characteristic examples being that a farmer doesn't have to go out and visit her or his cows every day, but to see whether the water is available, but instead can use a Internet of Things connectivity to get an image, for instance. So that's one of the things, that sort of thing is very important for us. GPS communications, so being able to, GPS positions, navigation and timing, really important as well. And then I think more generally, there's also the space weather or space environment aspect that's really important. You need to know, or need to know more anyway, about when you're going to have radio and other services cut off for your satellites and GPS cut off. And one way to know that is to know more about the ionosphere. But many cases, space is global. So most of the use cases will be global.
I was about to add, if I may, Ryuichi, is that I think that, agreed, I'm not too sure that you would say unique, but I think at various times there's priorities, and as Phil mentioned, the priorities for us are always going to be elements of bushfire, and as Eva mentioned, water is a significant priority for Australia. The challenge, though, is exactly, I think, was part of the other part of the question, and that is the vast geography that Australia has to deal with. And so innovative solutions such as IoT will play heavily into how Australians and Australian organisations address some of those challenges. And as Eva mentioned as well, so there are a number of use cases where IoT will be an absolute benefit to Australian farmers and agriculture and the resources area as well. And there was a very, very interesting one that was announced a few weeks ago that came from CSIRO about the space cows and the monitoring of cattle in the Northern Territory. And so a significant number of applications and creative applications as well too, that I think that our geography and our vast distances will lend to creative solutions here.
Thank you very much for the answer, everyone. Look, I think Professor Bland may have to leave shortly. Thanks again for joining us today, Professor.
Thank you so much. It's been a real pleasure. Thank you so much for organising this.
Yeah, thank you very much. Look, I don't know, do we have time for one last question? Yeah, okay. Well, I think, sure. Okay, then, well, I think we might wrap up with this question. So now that both Japan and Australia are drawing up strategies to go to the moon, there was a question that he would like to know about the characteristics and strength of each country. Obviously, Japan has developed a satellite called Kaguya in the past, and also there's various other companies such as Toyota developing the rover. And Australia also has some expertise in robotic technology. So perhaps, I don't know, maybe Mr. Doi, if you could perhaps comment on some of the strength and capabilities that Japan could bring. And also we'll ask the same question to the Australian side.
Okay, thank you very much for your question. Actually, for the future exploration to the moon and beyond, it is difficult. It is impossible for the one nation to complete the entire mission. So collaboration are very important. So in such sense, each country has its own strongest point or strongest technologies. So we should share that strength point to complete one big mission project program. So for Japanese JAXA case, we are going to, for example, in the Artemis, for the Artemis, JAXA are going to provide the environmental control and life support systems. So that is JAXA's focus point at this moment for future exploration. I think so. There are some other Australian focus points. So we will bring that point to the on orbit around the moon, on the moon. So that is JAXA's strategy.
Thank you very much. I don't know, Professor Cairns, I don't know, what are the sort of strength or expertise that we could, Australia could also bring?
Well, I suspect really this should be a question for Paul.
Yeah.
He knows
Indeed,
about
yeah.
the Australian strategy much more than I do. So maybe I should shush and let Cole talk, and then if there's I
Sure.
might add.
Thank you, Eva, but your insights are always valuable, and I would have welcomed yours as well. But I think just knowing that, acknowledging the time, I think and going towards what Doi-san was saying, I think there's a proverb, and I forget the origination of it, so I apologize to the culture that I forget here. But yeah, to go further, you need to go together. And so what that is complementarity, and by bringing each other's strengths to the table, we then complement each other and can do more things. And so in terms of Doi-san's commentary about supporting the Artemis project, for example, in that capacity, again, Australia is bringing to the table several different types of capabilities that can support space exploration in that particular exercise. We already have the ground stations that are active in supporting both NASA and ESA, and of course JAXA and ISRO, deep space missions and lunar missions already, and that will continue to be part of the global capability that Australia brings to the table. Our automation, robotics and automation elements, again, we acknowledge that Japan has some significant capability in these areas, but identifying some of those capabilities that Australia already collaborates with Japan in remote and hard to reach places such as our resources sector. There are a number of Japanese and Australian companies already collaborating on significantly remote and autonomous capabilities, significant skill sets in terms of identifying how one will operate a resources site from thousands of kilometers away in a properly scheduled and managed maintenance operations or sustainable operations procedures. And we hope to work with our partners to take a lot of that technology again to the lunar surface. And as part of our Trailblazer mission, we'll be trying to draw on a lot of those capabilities to demonstrate these strengths to the global space community. And we look forward to then collaborating even further with all of the Artemis partners and beyond in that exploration of space.
Right. Thank you very much for the in-depth response. Thank you very much for the great discussion. Just a little bit cautious of the time. We might sort of slowly wrap up here. But thanks again to all the panelists for great discussion. To close today's event, we'd like to ask Matt Kanazawa, Director and COO of Space BD, to give the closing remark.
Sure. So yeah, on behalf of Space BD, I would like to say a big thank you to all the speakers, and also thank you to all participants who made time and joined Australia-Japan Space Dialogue 2021. So the reason why we wanted to make this kind of an event is that we feel the power of cross-border Australia-Japan collaboration among academic and government and commercial initiative in the space industry through the launch process with Kuwaba and Cutting University. And one of my favorite quotes, it's in line with what Carl-san said and all the panelists mentioned this time. I heard it is from an African quote, says, if you want to go fast, go alone. But if you want to go fast, go together. So to make all effort in space industry forward, we believe collaboration could be one of the great solutions. And actually, this was the first international event Space BD hosted. Ryuichi actually joined from Antwerp, and I myself, by the way, Ryuichi is born in Australia originally, and I was in Dubai, and Takuma from Tokyo. So, but I hope all of you are enjoying. And this is the great, I hope this is the great first step to promote this kind of international cooperation in space sector led by commercial initiatives as well. So thank you again, and everyone stay well.
Alrighty. Well, thanks. Yeah, thank you very much, everyone, for your time today, for joining us. Let's make great progress to promote the space industries in Japan and Australia. See you again soon. Thank you. Bye.
Thank you. Goodbye.
Thank you. Bye-bye.
Thank you very much.
Bye-bye.
Right.
Thank you.